Theological disputes, Seeds of Dissent and Political Culture, Early Dissent, Anne Hutchinson, Roger Williams, and the Antinomian Controversy. Boston's theocratic order was challenged almost from the start. Anne Hutchinson, 1637–1638. Hutchinson's criticism of the colony's ministers and her claim to direct revelation from God led to her trial and banishment. Her case exposed the fragility of Puritan consensus and the dangers of dissent in a society where church and state were intertwined. Roger Williams's advocacy for religious liberty and separation of church and state led to his exile and the founding of Rhode Island, setting a precedent for religious tolerance and challenging the Puritan model of civic religious unity. The Halfway Covenant and the Great Awakening. Halfway Covenant 1662. As religious fervor waned, the Halfway Covenant allowed partial church membership for the children of baptized but unconverted members. This compromise reflected anxieties about maintaining religious purity and civic participation. The Great Awakening 1730s–1740s. Evangelical revivalism challenged the authority of established clergy and promoted individual religious experience, undermining the traditional alliance between church and civic authority and fostering a spirit of resistance to established power. Impact on civic authority. These disputes forced the colonial government to define the boundaries of acceptable belief and behavior, often resulting in the exclusion or punishment of dissent. Over time, repeated theological conflicts eroded the close alliance between church and state, fostering greater religious pluralism and laying the groundwork for later challenges to civic authority. 3. Civic activism, town meetings and participatory governance. The town meeting, incubator of democracy and resistance. Boston's governance was built on the New England town meeting, a system of direct democracy where male property holders debated and voted on local issues. Open participation. Town meetings allowed broad participation, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility among citizens' deliberation and consensus. These forums encouraged debate, amendment, and consensus building, nurturing critical thinking and engagement with public issues. Local autonomy. Town meetings preserved local self-government, allowing Bostonians to manage their own affairs and resist external interference. Early civic activism and resistance. Defense of charter rights. When the Massachusetts Charter was revoked in 1684 and replaced by the Dominion of New England, Bostonians led a revolt in 1689, arresting Governor Andros and restoring their previous government. A dramatic assertion of local rights. Opposition to trade regulations. Boston merchants and officials resisted British trade restrictions, developing networks to circumvent British laws and protesting customs enforcement. Public protests. Early protests against impressment and quartering of British troops, as well as the freeing of impressed men from British custody, demonstrated a willingness to challenge royal authority. Social institutions as engines of dissent. Taverns, churches, and the press played crucial roles in spreading dissent and organizing resistance. Taverns served as meeting places for planning and debate, while churches provided moral justification for resistance, and newspapers circulated critical ideas, balancing spiritual rigor with booming commerce. The Puritan work ethic and economic dynamism. Puritan theology encouraged hard work, discipline, and self-restraint, seeing all labor as a form of worship. This ethic, combined with Boston's poor soil and advantageous harbor, pushed the city toward maritime commerce. Merchant class. Boston's merchants, such as John Hancock and Peter Faneuil, became leaders in both economic and civic life, using their wealth to fund public projects and resistance efforts. Economic grievances. British trade restrictions and taxes directly threatened the profits and autonomy of Boston's merchants, prompting them to lead smuggling operations, organize boycotts, and frame resistance in terms of both economic self-interest and fundamental rights. Tensions and adaptations. Religious concerns. As commerce flourished, some Puritan leaders worried about declining religious observance and the corrupting influence of wealth, leading to stricter laws and renewed emphasis on discipline, integration of faith and profit. Many merchants saw no contradiction between piety and profit, using their wealth to support religious and civic projects. 6. The road to revolution. From dissent to direct action. Key events and escalation. 1765–1775, Boston's tradition of dissent and civic activism translated into direct resistance as British policies became more intrusive. Stamp Act riots. 1765, Violent protests against direct British taxation set a precedent for organized resistance. Townshend Acts and boycotts, 1767 to 1768. Boston merchants led non-importation agreements and boycotts, while the seizure of John Hancock's ship, the Liberty, sparked public outrage. Boston Massacre, 1770. The killing of 5 colonists by British soldiers became a rallying point for resistance. Boston Tea Party, 1773. The destruction of British tea in protest of the Tea Act led to harsh reprisals and united the colonies in opposition intolerable acts. 1774. The closing of Boston Harbor and other punitive measures galvanized support for Boston and led to the First Continental Congress. Lexington and Concord, 1775. The first battles of the Revolution began with British attempts to seize colonial arms, marking the outbreak of open warfare. Institutions of revolution. Harvard College produced many revolutionary leaders and fostered a spirit of inquiry and resistance. Newspapers. The Massachusetts Spy and Boston Gazette spread revolutionary ideas and mobilized public opinion. Taverns. Places like the Green Dragon Tavern served as headquarters for the Sons of Liberty and sites for planning direct action. Comparison to other colonial cities, Boston's revolutionary development was unique in its intensity, early onset, and the interplay of its religious, civic, and economic structures. While Philadelphia and New York also became centers of resistance, Boston's participatory governance, merchant-driven economy, and tradition of dissent made it the spark and model for the broader revolutionary movement. Conclusion. Boston as the seedbed of revolution. Boston's path to revolution was rooted in its Puritan heritage, participatory governance, and economic dynamism. The city's unique blend of spiritual rigor, theological dispute, civic activism, and intellectual leadership created a culture primed for dissent and resistance. Winthrop City upon a Hill sermon set the stakes high, creating a legacy of aspiration, anxiety, and innovation. The result was a city that, for better and for worse, embodied the dream and the discipline of a people determined to build a godly community, and ultimately, to challenge the might of an empire. The seeds of 1776 were sown in Boston's meetinghouses, marketplaces, and classrooms, making it the true seedbed of American Revolution.